Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Top Story, where I focus on Syria. I'm Qizhi. In this edition, we'll take a look at how Damascus is faring after rebels seized full control of the Syrian capital, and how different countries and the international community are responding to the latest Syrian crisis. Streets are empty and shops are closed in Damascus after rebels seized full control of the Syrian capital. President Bashar al-Assad has fled to Moscow. The Russian Foreign Ministry says al-Assad left Syria and gave orders for a peaceful transfer of power. Haider Kazwini has more from Damascus.
We can say that the night in Damascus was quieter than the previous night here. No sound of clashes, no sound of celebratory shooting by the rebels. The rebels are controlling all the city of Damascus, all southern area also of Damascus. The rebels yesterday sent elite forces to enforce the laws in Damascus after some kind of looting by some other out-of-law rebels here. The Prime Minister of Syria has ordered all the ministers who stayed in Damascus, who didn't leave Damascus, who didn't leave Syria, to come to their work, to maybe caretaking, to make the services being provided, because people now they need the services, they need the bread, they need the food items to be back to the market. So he insisted on the health minister and the minister of domestic trade to be on duty. He said earlier that he is staying in Damascus in a video actually published on his social media page.
I am in my house and I have not left, and this is because of me belonging to this country and not knowing any other country to be home. This country can be a normal country, a country that builds good relations with neighbors and with the world without entering into any regional alliances or blocs. But we'll leave this matter to any new leadership that will be chosen by the Syrian people, and we're ready to cooperate with the new leadership and facilitate what they need so the various government files can be transferred smoothly and systematically in a way to preserve the state's facilities.
Actually, this government now is something like, we can describe it as caretaking government. The Prime Minister actually made a national attitude to stay in with his people, to help the Syrians in this critical moment. He didn't leave Syria. This was welcomed too much by most of the Syrians, although they are pro or anti-Syrian government.
That is Haider Kazwini in Damascus. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has met his Turkish and Iranian counterparts in Doha. Moscow says it supports a diplomatic solution to the crisis in Syria. Syrian opposition leaders have agreed to guarantee the safety of Russian military bases and diplomatic institutions in Syria. Dasha Chinishova reports.
The security at the Russian military facilities in Syria, that is primarily the Maymim airfield as well as the naval base in Tartus, has been increased, and Moscow has reiterated that there is no immediate threat to those facilities. But having said that, we also have heard some Russian lawmakers saying that at this stage what is important for Moscow is to make sure that there is security provided for the families of the diplomats inside Syria as well as for the Russian servicemen. Well, indeed, we have seen the Russian foreign minister meeting in Doha, and there have been many meetings and many statements coming out from there. So the main idea that we have heard was the urge from the Russian side to preserve the territorial integrity of Syria. We also have heard that the Astana format has previously agreed to increase the humanitarian aid deliveries to the country. They have also been speaking about the need to implement Resolution 2254 of the UN Security Council and to support the UN efforts to conduct the to find the diplomatic solution to the ongoing crisis, or to the crisis that has been there before. However, it all is unclear how these calls will actually stand now, as the situation has drastically changed, and Moscow is actually sort of realizing the new realities on the ground is to ensure that there is the smooth transition that will not be putting in jeopardy the lives of the civilian population.
That was Dasha Chinishova. After taking over, opposition fighters in Syria appeared on state television channels to announce what they described as the fall of Damascus and the end of President Bashar al-Assad's rule. Following their capture of the Syrian capital, rebels in Damascus have stormed the Iranian embassy. Ahsan Kavani has more.
Iran's embassy in Damascus has been attacked by the rebels and armed forces. We had footage showing the windows broken and many documents and papers scattered around, and the properties of the Iranian embassy in Syria either destroyed or stolen. According to unconfirmed reports, the Iranian staff of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, or the IRGC, evacuated their bases around Damascus since Friday and left Syria. Now Iran has lost this important platform in the region. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has blamed the US and Israel for the turmoil in Syria, and Araghchi says after Gaza they went for Lebanon, and now they have gone for Syria. Iranian foreign minister warned that this will not be confined to Syria, as the whole region has been threatened. Iran is really unhappy with what is happening in Syria. After all, Tehran and Damascus were strategic allies in the Middle East for decades. Syria was the main front for Iran in the region, where it could logistically and militarily support the resistant groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, as well as Hamas and other Palestinian groups.
That was Ahsan Kavani reporting. The international community is calling for restoration of order in Syria following the dramatic developments in the country. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the future of Syria is a matter for its people to determine. He also said there is much work to be done to ensure an orderly political transition and renewed institutions. The United Nations envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, urged all groups to avoid violence and respect human rights. He also said the UN supports the Syrian people to choose their path toward the future.
Let me urge all Syrians to prioritize dialogue, unity, and respect for international humanitarian law and human rights as they seek to rebuild their society. Let me stress that there must be a collective effort to secure peace and dignity for all, and that I stand ready to support the Syrian people in their journey towards a stable and inclusive future decided and shaped by the Syrian people themselves.
The European Commission President said the bloc will help rebuild a Syrian state that protects all minorities. China has called for efforts to find a political solution to help restore stability and order in Syria as soon as possible. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said all parties concerned should be guided by the principle of responsibility for the long term and the fundamental interests of the Syrian people when looking for a political solution. She added that the future of Syria should be determined by its people. Among Arab countries, Egypt stressed that all parties in Syria need to preserve the capabilities of the state and national institutions. Qatar said it is pushing for a unified Arab position on Syria. In Iraq, a government spokesperson says his country is closely following the situation in Syria. He also reaffirmed the importance of not interfering in Syria's internal affairs or supporting one party over another. Iraq evacuated its embassy in Syria, moving staff to Lebanon after rebels took control of Damascus. Laith al-Haida with the Associated Press has more from Baghdad.
Well, actually, we know that 2,000 Syrian military personnel with all their gears have entered Iraq through Al-Qaim, but as far as we know, they just been controlled by the Iraqi government, and it's pre-made by the SDF and the Iraqi government as an agreement to receive all these refugees from the battle of war in Syria, and to take those who are injured to the hospitals to have medical care in Al-Qaim hospital. Actually, the issue is that along the border between Syria and Iraq, the Minister of Interior have announced that all the borders have been secured by the big forces from the border forces in order to secure it from any kind of violations through the coming days. But some political analyzers and experts says that the SDF is now busy of forming their administrational government, and the coming government in Syria. So they are expecting no more chaos or some violations in the borders. But we all waiting for what kind of government will be formed in Syria. Is it going to be moderate or radical? So all these questions will be answered soon, maybe by the coming Syrian government.
That was Laith al-Haider in Baghdad. In the United States, President Joe Biden said former President Bashar al-Assad should be held accountable and that the U.S. will engage with all Syrian groups to help rebuild the country. He made a statement as U.S. forces launched dozens of airstrikes against militant camps of the Islamic State group. Vladimir Putin has more.
U.S. President Joe Biden reacted to the rebel takeover in Syria Sunday, making an address from the Roosevelt Room in the White House. He made a number of key points, including reiterating his support for allies in the region, including Jordan, Lebanon and Israel, committing to sending senior officials to the region in the coming days. Biden also reiterated the protection he would supply to troops that are still in Syria, 900 U.S. troops still in the south of the country. Another key point that Biden stressed was the importance, in his view, of engaging Syrians in a transition to a new government, to achieving the aim of having a sovereign and independent Syria. Let's listen.
It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country. It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty. As we all turn to the question of what comes next, the United States will work with our partners and the stakeholders in Syria to help them seize an opportunity to manage the risks.
In his address, Biden also mentioned that on Sunday morning, the United States undertook precision airstrikes on targets within Syria against the Islamic State. Important to remember, of course, that the rebel takeover was helmed by HTS, which is an umbrella for a number of rebel groups that have different values, are multi-factioned. And the HTS themselves are designated by the United States as a terrorist group, so they're very keen with the fall of the Bashar al-Assad government to ensure that there isn't a power vacuum in which the likes of Islamic State and al-Qaeda could gain prominence once again. In terms of what's happening on the ground, many Syrians are keen to return to their homes. Over 14 million were displaced over the course of more than a decade of the civil war in Syria. North of 6 million displaced and fled the country. In the last few days, as the rebel takeover continued, thousands more left their homes. The United Nations keen to ensure human security is restored, mentioning that they are committed to humanitarian assistance, including securing food and fuel for the Syrian people. Geir Pedersen, the UN Special Envoy to Syria, saying on Sunday morning in a statement, to those displaced, this moment renews the vision of returning to homes once lost. To families separated by war, the beginnings of reunions bring hope. To those unjustly detained and the families of the detained and the missing, the opening of prison doors reminds us of justice's eventual reach. The rebel takeover in Syria happening at a key moment in Middle East politics as wars continue in Gaza as well as Lebanon.
That was Vladimir Putin reporting. For more on the future of Syria, Pandan spoke to James Dorsey, an adjunct senior fellow from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technology University in Singapore.
Now the rebels are granting the Prime Minister of the Assad government to play a caretaking role. So the big question is, what happens next? Are we going to see some kind of overhaul of the current political and even constitutional orders in Syria?
I don't think there's any doubt that you will see an overhaul constitutionally as well as a political system. I think the question is going to be a political transition to what? There is obviously talk of an 18-month transition period and elections after that. If one looks at the track record, certainly of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the leading rebel group that came out of Idlib, in Idlib itself, it introduced an economically successful regime. With other words, it turned Idlib from the poorest province in Syria to the fastest growing province in the region in the country. But at the same time, it introduced a very autocratic form of government in which it tolerated very little dissent.
Now, talking about this 18 months transitional period, we know even within the rebels concept itself, they have so many different factions, and sometimes they disagree with each other profoundly. And considering the whole nation of Syria, they have different tribes, different provinces, different people, different groups of people believing in different religions. So what are the major obstacles you are expecting during this 18 months process?
There are potentially major pitfalls. You have a coalition of rebel groups and opposition groups that run the gamut from left to right, from autocracy to democracy, and we will have to see how those groups balance power out. You have the issue of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has said that it recognizes diversity, it wants an inclusive society. That could put the group, and with it the government, at odds with Turkey. It's not that Turkey does not want inclusivity, but it has a very different definition of that. This is a government that will want to restore Syrian sovereignty over all of Syrian territory, which means not just the Golan Heights that are occupied by Israel since 1967, but a buffer zone in northern Syria that Turkey has established to push the Kurds further away from the Turkish border.
That was James Dorsey, an adjunct senior fellow from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technology University in Singapore, sharing his insights on the future of Syria. And that's it for this special edition of The Top Story on the situation in Syria. The Top Story is a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can also subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thanks for listening.